Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's the Ukraine War Frontline update for the 1st of January 2024, and just to let you know that there will be a resumption to normal routine, I guess, over the coming few days as my boys go back to school. I will be able to give more time to looking at the source material for the mapping. JR has been amazing getting over his COVID, and I hope he's okay, but he's done today's mapping, did yesterday's mapping, done a lot of mapping recently. So thank you so much to him, and thank you to the source mappers, particularly Andrew Perpetua. If you get a chance to follow him on Twitter and subscribe to him on YouTube, please do so. He does an incredible job and puts in an inordinate amount of work to what he does. So if you can also chip in a little bit for supporting his mapping costs, as he has to pay for the hosting of the mapping, that would be great. If you have the wherewithal, you can follow the links on both of those places, YouTube and Twitter. But yes, as you can see, none of my mappers have, none of my source mappers have, I don't own them, have any changes to the northeastern sector, Kupiansk to Svatovo to Crimea, although there will be activity going along up there. I haven't looked in detail at, say, the ISW again today, just it's the time of year where I've just been super crazy busy. But as we look further down, we come to Bakhmut, so we'll bypass Crimea, Serebryensky Forest, Siversk, come to Bakhmut. We can see in northern Bakhmut, there's a bit of a rejig as far as we're concerned. JR said he missed this one. It's a bit of an Andrew Perpetua mapping change, but actually nothing over the last 24 hours. In fact, it's the 27th when he changed that, and that just goes to show that, you know, that's 4 to 5 days ago since Andrew last changed the mapping around Avdiivka, and there are rumors that the Russians have sort of paused around northern Bakhmut and Avdiivka as they gather themselves and try and accumulate more forces to possibly go again. But it seems like a form of sort of culmination that has taken place, where they've kind of exhausted their forward momentum and have to wait until they have more forces to go again. And that could be said about the south. Now, although Surrey Maps has an update that was subsequent to what JR did on the mapping front, I think this update, I mean, if you look closely, there is no change to what mapping we have, even though Surrey Maps says that this change, you know, this was an update from 7:20 tonight, so only less than an hour ago. But I think this is really, as he says here, just to culminate an accumulation in the last 5 days. So during the last 5 days, the Russians recaptured a railway section between Avdiivka and Zelenopilia, and on New Year's Eve, troops recaptured the last parts of the railway. So I think that's probably what we did yesterday. What JL showed yesterday is now being tweeted about. So really no change to the last 24 hours, and again that suggests that things have certainly slowed down. You'll probably see movements here or there. Really it's going to be dependent on what takes place to the northwest of Klishchiivka here, as to what then happens further down south. There's no real point. I've said before, the Ukrainians pushing further down south in Avdiivka, which it had been actually over the last week, just around this area north of Avdiivka. Apparently the Ukrainians have had some success, but I think they've subsequently been repelled. But I don't think there's too much point in doing that if they aren't secure behind the Klishchiivka on these heights and this large trench network that sits to the west of Klishchiivka. So until they can establish control over that, the Ukrainians, I think they're probably not going to push too much further to the east. So we'll see what happens there. Now, interestingly, I mean, it looks like there's been a bit of a game for the Ukrainians here, but it's actually another thing that we slightly missed. So the Ukrainians are slightly further forward around this tailings or spoil heap in this mining area around Avdiivka. No change in the last 24 hours, as JR says, that's 26th. But just to give you an indication that the Ukrainians are slightly further forward there. Then we come to the north of Avdiivka, where the Ukrainians have been under pressure quite a lot. The Russians appear to be gaining a little bit, according to Andrew Perpetua, north of Stepova, but actually that is more in line with what the other mappers had already said. So I don't know that that's particularly something's happened in the last 24 hours. It's just a bit of rejigging, map clarification, actually, from a couple of the sources there. It's good news for the Ukrainians that they appear to have stopped the Russians from making further advances in the Stepova area, because actually that is really important for stopping the Russians making this neck of the cauldron more and more problematic for the Ukrainians. So stopping the advances here and stopping the advances down by Severny is super important. Any further advances here can spell quite easily, I think, spell problems for the Ukrainians. And I know a pro-Ukrainian had a go at me for like, oh, you were sort of doom posting about Avdiivka previously. Not really. Like what I was saying before is entirely relevant for now still, which is to say that it is precarious, right? If the Ukrainians lose the coke plant, then they lose Avdiivka. If they lose this supply road coming into Avdiivka and this neck gets closed, that route gets interdicted, that's the end for Avdiivka. If the Russians start, majorly coming through the south here into Avdiivka, the main part of Avdiivka, then essentially the writing's on the wall for Avdiivka there. So from all directions, things are on a bit of a knife point. But having said that, the Ukrainians seem quite able to hold the Russians off around the coke plant, because they have the advantage of being in these buildings and having height advantage in terms of sniper positions and spotting for drones and whatnot. So it's going to be difficult for the Russians to take that unless they have some really significant forces. Now, they've been trying to circumvent the coke plant by attacking by this water treatment plant, and they have had some success. They've had some grinding success south of Severny, which is a bit of a worry, but this is flat ground and makes it very difficult for the Russians, to make any great advances, as they'll be doing so through the open fields. And we've seen what happens to the Russian columns when they do that. But nonetheless, things are difficult, and Avdiivka is, really challenging. The Ukrainians are finding it tough there, but they have done a really good job of keeping the Russians at bay. It just depends whether the Russians are going to continue doing what they've done, which is throwing bodies at the problem and indeed mechanized equipment, and try to grind out those meters. And if they continue to do that, then they can still prevail here. It would just come at an inordinate cost. But that's the kind of Russian way of doing things. Everything I've said about Avdiivka still remains the case as far as I'm concerned. Right, then we come down to Mariinka. No changes, as you can see, and no changes in Novomykhailivka. There is quite a bit of footage coming out around Novomykhailivka, but about this kind of road of death. And I'm not sure whether it's this road, or this road here, or indeed any other road that you can see. Maybe this one around here. But there are certain routes around Novomykhailivka, and probably all of them really, where the Russians, again, as we've seen in Avdiivka, Kupiansk, Krinky, have lost an awful lot of equipment. There is more footage there is more footage that's come out today to suggest that. Again. Right, anyway, as we come further to the south and round that dogleg to Vuhledar, past Velika Novosilka, you can see there's no changes to the mapping. A little change to the mapping here. Well, I say little, I mean, it is fairly significant, but we had seen it previously, so the map has sort of catching up with each other to agree broadly that the Russians really have taken a large swathe of land here, reaching from Novoprokopivka across to Verbove and moving up the Surovikin lines, both the tank ditches and Dragon's Teeth here, as well as the manned trenches further behind. This was hard fought over. The Ukrainians did take it. It was something of the grey zone, I guess, around here more so than it was up here. But it is a shame that the Ukrainians have ceded that to the Russians, and the Russians have taken that. However, like I've said before, I don't think this whole sector is particularly important as far as the value of that land. It's not like the value of, say, this land here and Avdiivka as a whole in terms of access to Donetsk is not the same as all of this area being super important. I think Novomykhailivka and Mariinka, or at least the towns behind Mariinka, are important. They do have tactical importance in a way that I don't think the Robotyne area does. So if the Ukrainians were to lose all of that land right back to where they started, I don't think that has too much meaning, to be honest. And the other area that there's activity is the Krinky area, but again, no changes there, no expansion to the front line either. But yeah, it's here. It's about what happened in the air. So I'm wondering whether we will see the VKS start to return to doing sorties around here, or whether they're still going to be worried about the Patriot system that was supposedly in the area that shot down our 3 Su-34s. And likewise, whether we'll start seeing VKS turning up on the Eastern Front. They stopped for a while as one was lost around Mariupol. I don't know whether the VKS has started bombarding Novomykhailivka again, but we have seen a number, as I've said, of Russian vehicles destroyed in the area. So yeah, tough around there for the Russians. Tough in most places for the Russians. I did that analysis of the loss stats, and I think this period for the Russians of their own attacking has been incredibly painful for them in terms of lost mechanized equipment, artillery, Gimlers, although artillery is dropping and Gimlers to some extent dropping over the last few weeks, because I just don't think they have the pieces that they would have had 6 months ago. I think it's been hugely attritional for them. And I think if the Ukrainians can stay on this defensive stance and trick the Russians as they commit some kind of maneuver harikiri, then we could have a useful 3 or 4 months for the Ukrainians. They might lose land, but if they lose land at the expense of vast numbers of Russian personnel and equipment, then that'll be worth it for the Ukrainians. So, it's going to be interesting. We might see a lot of red pins or some grinding away at the territory control map by the Russians, but that you shouldn't interpret that as necessarily all being bad. It's about matching that up with what's going on in terms of loss ratios. As long as the Ukrainians keep their losses minimal and exact a huge cost from the Russians, if that continues, then land is kind of secondary at this point in the war. That's my opinion, as I explained in more depth yesterday. Anyway, that's the mapping update. Not too many changes. Thank you so much. Take care, and I'll get back to you tomorrow. Toodle pips.